For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.
The 20-minute timer is set. I guess whoever wants to lead is fine with me. You can take turns, I suppose.
Do you mind if I do, or do you want to? It doesn't matter to me.
Well, I mean, I got a few. Well, I want to say thanks for your rebuttal, keeping it respectful. It's up to you. I mean, I've got I know you talked about science.
Okay,
and
I'll ask you just a real quick question, and then and it doesn't really involve anything else, so you can segue right off that into whatever you want to get into.
No problem. Go ahead, brother.
Whenever you started out, if you don't mind, look back at your script, and I would like for you to tell me when you said that you started off with an assumption. Well, what is the assumption that you start off with?
Well, if we start off with the assumption that, say, the Bible is true and the Bible is the history book of the universe, we can make retrodictions, predictions,
Sure.
Testable predictions actually is what I'm making here as well. So if those are confirmed and those are consistent, say in regards to at least retrodictions, then that's pretty significant proof that, the Genesis story as found in the Bible should be taken literally. In a lot of your other religious books, you're not going to be able to make these accurate retrodictions and predictions. So if I started with the assumption that Genesis is true, but then I couldn't make accurate retrodictions, accurate predictions, that are falsifiable, well, then that's a very good sign that
what predictions can you make?
Well, for example, we can make predictions based on the fact that Adam and Eve were created with pre-existing functional DNA differences. So it would be ad hoc if that didn't make any testable predictions. But of course, we would say that we'd expect those DNA differences that are encoded into Adam and Eve, into the created kinds, would be functional. Versus say,
that's what we'd expect, but that's not prediction. What you're doing is you're describing it here. You're giving it body. Would they just say that we didn't know? All right, say that we have all the knowledge that we do about mitochondrial DNA and everything else that you've talked about. What future predictions can you make?
Well, for example, that is a future prediction because I've talked to many evolutionists. They'll admit that, max functionality of the genome is maybe 20%, probably more like 10%. But what we actually now know is that at least 80% of, the non-coding DNA, we know that that's transcribed in RNA, which suggests function. And the trajectory of discovery favors genome-wide functionality, not just 20%.
Where in the Bible?
That is a prediction. That's a testable prediction, my man.
How much? What I'm saying is who is predicting this? Because it's not the Bible. The Bible doesn't predict anything about DNA.
We're making a prediction based on the fact that God, his command to be fruitful and multiply, we're not saying that was to be carried out by cloning. So if you acknowledge that very specific genetic view, the fact that, these design variants that God would have placed into Adam and Eve and the created kinds, we'd predict that those would be functional DNA differences. So we're predicting contradictory to the evolutionists that say max amount of genome functionality is 20%. We're saying that the vast majority of DNA is functional. And we're actually seeing that right now because contradictory to the evolutionary view, the non-coding DNA, it actually functions much like a computer. And it's
but
regulatory functions. Yeah, go ahead.
But my point is that your presupposition is the only thing that is you have the presupposition, you have the means to get to your conclusion, and then you have the conclusion that you just got to, and none of those are in the Bible. Those are things that you use not the Bible for, but science for. You can make all those predictions without the Bible. I'm talking about predictions you can make with the Bible. We're talking about evidence for your God creating the universe.
Well, no, it's the Bible as recorded in Genesis that actually tells us that Adam and Eve were the first male and female in existence, and that God created these created kinds. And we can actually see that this is a prediction that flows naturally from Genesis. So if this is a prediction that is actually falsified, then that prediction based on that pre-existing heterozygosity, that would be false. I'm telling you, you can go in the lab, you can do whatever you have, because we understand very little of the DNA language, probably less than 5% since comprehensive knockout experiments on humans Unfortunately, it's unethical. They've yet to be performed. So for any evolutionists to say, oh, max 20% functionality, that's premature to make that claim. And we're actually putting it on paper that, this is a prediction, genome-wide functionality.
Okay.
And so
Who's
far that's
predicting this?
Well, intelligent design advocates have always predicted that. For example, these pseudogenes are now known to be DNA functional elements. ERVs, endogenous retroviruses, are now known to be functional in the placenta and the embryo.
So what you're saying is the Bible isn't doing this. It's you have prophets. Is that what you're saying? They prophesied this?
No. This wasn't a prophecy. I'm talking about intelligent design advocates, proponents, scientists. They've always said, why would we create like a car that's 80% junk? So obviously, if we're created by God and then we're making the hypothesis that Adam and Eve, based on the Bible and God's command to be fruitful and multiply, was not to be carried out by cloning, we'd expect these functional DNA differences, and that's actually what we're seeing. So they're not these evolutionary leftovers, these genomic fossils.
Okay, well, you know what? And that's not my claim. Like, you're sitting here, you're wanting to apparently argue an evolutionist. That's apparently what you came here for. I'm not arguing for evolution. I'm arguing against creationism. And you have still yet to provide evidence for it, because none of the claims that you made about genetic entropy or any of this stuff has anything to do with creationism or the Bible or your God. And I'm sorry to interrupt. Of course, if the Bible records a time of extremely long lives, we would expect that. Looking at our lives now, looking at the accumulating mutation-related diseases, we see it. It's entropic degeneration on all levels, and we actually see that these low-impact deleterious mutations are degenerating us, and we see that Genesis records a time of increased longevity. That's a direct prediction from Genesis. How else do you explain that? No, it's not, because first of all, the people who Genesis is writing about, it isn't even proposed to be. It's not even written around the time these people were proposed to have lived. So there's that. Secondly, I don't want you to slap and run. I don't want you to slap and run. The Bible clearly records the ages, and then we see a significant drop off. It's a decay curve, the exact same decay curve we see based on this accumulating damage by low impact deleterious mutation. You can deny science all you want. You're right. You're right.
Point of least genetic.
You do see a dive off. You see Methuselah living
to Genesis.
Right, you see Methuselah living that long. You see Moses living, or Noah living that long. In fact, he was like 600 before he started building a boat. Abraham. All these.
Which makes sense, right? Because we've accumulated these genetic mistakes, these degenerate
and you start dropping off, right? Right. Okay. So it's really funny that the low point of that is right around the time that we start having verifiable evidence of life expectancy, because life expectancy has done nothing but go up.
Well, no.
Yes.
The average lifespan has gone up based on medical intervention, but the maximum lifespan, come on, man, that has not gone up. That will not go up. And we see entropic degeneration on all levels, increased rates of cancer, autism, immunological diseases. It's ever. You have to be a science denialist to stay. And you see that the ages have dropped off post-flood. You see that actually in Leviticus, that's when Moses put in the law that you can't marry close relatives, because we know those shared genetic mistakes, marrying close relatives, well, that's going to expose the hidden reservoir of genetic mistakes. But they didn't have that pre-flood. They didn't have that.
Can you demonstrate anybody in the past 1,000 years, in the past 2,000 years, in it's reported by a historian, whatever, that is said, or that whose lifespan exceeds that of today?
Well, we have thousands and thousands of legends of the golden age where people were said to have lived to 900, 800, 1,000. We see it recorded in the Bible. That's a historical.
Yes, it is recorded in the Bible. It is recorded in the Bible, and when it is recorded, it is not recorded at a time that these people were to have lived.
See, the thing is, we're making predictions and retrodictions right from I want to mention something which you said about why, because I'm glad that you actually addressed the Y chromosomal atom. So you obviously see if that's true, Y chromosomal atom, mitochondrial Eve, if that's true, you're saying that they're separated, they're thousands and thousands of years ago. But how do you explain based on the observed mutation rate of, let's just say, the human Y chromosome,
Okay.
the fact that there's so little mutations and such low genetic diversity between, like, any two humans, max 0.5% different, and that's why the evolutionists have to resort to a bottleneck. So how do you explain that?
There isn't much genetic diversity because, I mean, we stay to ourselves. I mean, we marry within our own cultures. In fact, in places that we see the most genetic diversity are the places where they have outsiders coming in, where they're actually expanding the gene pool, so to speak.
But the small number of mutations that separate modern men from the sequence of Y chromosome Adam, that actually indicates that this man lived in the relatively recent past. You said thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of years ago. So how do you reconcile that without invoking something like a near extinction event?
Because for one, I am not operating on your presupposition that there is genetic entropy, that it's just this perpetual entropy to where we're just like dwindling down to nothing. Like what you understand genetical entropy to be, and what genetical entropy really are two totally different things. Like genetical entropy are things like aging and Alzheimer's and miscarriages and speech impediments. I mean, there's so many, but what it is, what genetic entropy.
No. I just want to correct you there real quick before you go on too long. What genetic entropy is the fact that most mutations, they're nearly neutral. So they're unselectable, they're invisible to natural selection. So they accumulate very small effects, and then they accumulate relentlessly. So natural selection, which I'm sure you're aware of, that's going to amplify the best beneficial mutations and get rid of the worst detrimental mutations. But at the end of the day, it can't do anything against the invisible damage caused by near neutral, low impact mutations. So how are you going to solve that degeneration problem if those mutations build up? 100 per person per generation. That's 700 billion new mutations, unselectable this generation alone. So what type of mechanism, what type of selection are you going to use to resolve that problem there, Jim?
What math are you using to come to that? How are you verifying that there's, what did you say, 7 million mutations?
Well, I'm saying that it's widely recognized. You can just Google it. It's
recognized?
It's recognized by the evolutionary community that we inherit 100 new mutations per person per generation.
I'm talking about passing them on, because there's one thing about inheriting a gene that may have not been how would you call it? I'm not a geneticist. I guess activated, so to speak.
I understand what you're saying, but I mean, are you disagreeing with I mean, we begin to add new mutations to, say, our genetic load at the first division of our zygote, and I think it's approximately 3 new mutations every cell division throughout our lifetime. But it's just 100 mutations through our reproductive lines, through our reproductive cells, because your somatic mutations, they're not going to be passed on, say, from your skin cells, for example. I mean, we actually die due primarily to mutation accumulation, but it's the 100 mutations per person per generation that we accumulate. So like my children, they're going to have 100 more mistakes than I have, and my children's children, they're going to have 200 approximately more mistakes than I have. So those mutations are pouring into the population. How do you resolve that? That's perfectly consistent with Genesis.
But no, it's not consistent with Genesis, because Genesis doesn't make that claim. But what I'm saying is, though, Genesis does the same thing about genetic entropy. Like, you are making that.
Are you saying that the Bible doesn't say that the entire creation grown?
You just talked like a minute straight.
Well, I just don't want you to slap and run, because the Bible does say after the fall, we have now experienced death. By one man, death was brought into the world. Death, extinction. Go ahead.
I just want to make sure that I totally understand that you have to be able to give answers to the objections, because you're defending that you're the only one defending of you. But just to get a little bit more time from Jim in terms of.
But I want to apologize. I'm just saying, because if my direct predictions and retrodictions are coming from Genesis, and he's saying Genesis doesn't say that, obviously we know after the fall, death was brought into the world by one man, Adam. So just wanted to correct you on that. But go ahead. I won't interrupt.
No, and to me, like, that's not something that that I have to account for. It's not something that I have to explain, because I'm perfectly happy with letting scientists and geneticists further map the genomes and further map these Y chromosomes and further understand these, and to be able to sample them more and discover these different mutations, because only by discovering these mutations can we rearrange the family tree. Can we see what that Y chromosome atom was and where he came from and how we all fit into this? Like, only by doing genetic research can we do that, and there's no genetic research in the Old Testament, bottom line.
Well, yeah, we are. For example, there are, like, for example, population geneticists, they widely recognize that human mutation is catastrophic and that man is presently degenerating. They've come up with, mechanisms, say synergistic epistasis, mutation count mechanism, to attempt to solve the problem. It was an evolutionary population geneticist by the name of Alexei Kondrashov. He actually said, why are we not extinct 100 times over? Because he's recognizing that this accumulation of low impact deleterious mutations, it is a problem, and genomes are devolving and the genome is rusting out like a car. And I know you're not here to defend evolution, but you know what, these evolutionists say we started off as a single-celled organism, multi-celled organism, fish.
Right. And that's the thing, though. Like, I'm not here to defend evolutionism, and you're not here to argue against it. You're here to argue for the creation of the universe.
Which I am. I agree with what I'm just saying it's a double whammy. It demonstrates biblical creation, a literal interpretation in Genesis, and it destroys pond scum to people evolution. That's why I love it. It's evolutions. It happens in the imagination of those who want to believe in it. And at the end of the day, all the evidence points right back to a time of creation, a time of perfection. It's devolution, not evolution. That's what we.
Sure, it does. Going off of your first sentence of your opening statement, if you were operating from a presupposition, because if you're not operating from the Bible, you can look at many texts and you can read genetics, you can read whatever you want into text. As a matter of fact, the older the text, the better. It's a lot easier to read BS into a literary device. The Old Testament's really good at that. You can make it seem whatever you want, and that's why there are young Earth creationists. That's why there are old Earth creationists. That's why nobody can make their mind up, because people read into it what they want to read into it.
Okay, let me ask you a question then. Okay, so at least you agree, obviously you've said that it was written afterwards and all this, but at least we agree the Bible does record a time when people had extremely long lives. Okay, so let's stay there. Now, if there were initially, say, no mutation, let's say theoretically, hypothetically, just kind of work with me. Let's just say there were initially no mutations. Wouldn't you expect, Jim, just be honest with yourself, be honest with the evidence, wouldn't you expect the maximal human age to be much longer? Doesn't that just make logical sense, just hypothetically?
No, it doesn't.
Oh, okay, so if we die primarily due to mutation accumulation, we see there's entropic degeneration on all levels. Thousands and thousands of new mutations related diseases are added to the database every year. Obviously, if you take that back to a point of least genetic entropy, that makes complete sense. And the Bible report, if you're just going to say no to that, then there's nothing more than I can say in regards to that. But if you actually look at the Bible,
but there's not, because I have no frame of reference. Like, you're asking me to just presume that these people really were this old, when all evidence that we have from all of written history, like, we know that people don't live to be that old. As a matter of fact, it's pretty common knowledge that the farther you go back, the shorter people's lives were.
Well, actually, for one, I've already said there's thousands of legends of the Golden Age, okay?
I'm sorry, was that legends?
Everything you see in the fossil record, everything was bigger. Everything, look at the megalodon shark. It was massive. Look at kangaroos were huge, dinosaurs. Everything just points to the fact that we are living in a fallen, degenerate world. Look at life around us. Look at it. The thing is, if you actually look at, let's say when the lifespan of early, biblical characters and their ages are compared in the Bible, since I'm defending the Bible data, even if you don't agree with it, it clearly reveals, you can actually plot a graph with all the ages and the decline. It does reveal an exponential. And that curve can only be described as biological. I don't know any other.
No, it can't. No, look, entropy is natural. It is natural. One day our sun is going to implode. One day our sun is going to implode upon itself. At one point, this Earth couldn't survive because it was too hot, and one day it won't be able to survive because it's too cold. And if you're taking the Genesis account literally, I mean, you know, how did plants survive without water when you know, when they were when plants were here the day before water? How did they grow? You know, I mean, we could go into that petty stuff.
Okay, well,
but
if you want to, okay, so you were talking about testable and falsifiable predictions. So I've given you a few based on genetics. If you want to go into, say, for example, say the flood. Okay, so if we're going to look at all the layers, the fossil record, I mean, we can even make testable predictions based on the global flood that's actually been confirmed.
Can we touch on the example that I made?
What's the example you made? Are you talking about plants on?
We're at.
Are you saying at 20? What's that, James?
Actually, time. So we've hit the 20-minute mark.